White heavy checkmark disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction, inspired by true emotions and common life experiences. All names, characters, places, and events are either products of the author's imagination or used in a fictitious manner. Any resemblance to real people, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. This story is created for entertainment purposes only and does not aim to offend, harm, or misrepresent anyone or any group. Rachel had always been careful with her words. She believed that in a world where everything was a click away, every message carried weight, especially the ones sent in the middle of the night. But heartbreak doesn't respect logic. On that quiet Tuesday evening, wrapped in a worn-out hoodie and surrounded by tissue-stuffed coffee mugs, she typed out a message she never thought she'd send. It was long, raw, and full of emotion, a digital scream into the void. It began with, "I don't know why I'm writing this, but I need to say it," and ended with a trembling goodbye. The message was meant for her ex, Nathan, a man who had spent 2 years making her feel like she was both too much and never enough. Her hands shook as she hit send, but she had sent it to the wrong number. It wasn't until morning that she realized the mistake. Her phone buzzed with a reply from an unknown contact. "I think this wasn't meant for me, but are you okay?" At first, she was mortified. Her face flushed with embarrassment, and she immediately typed back an apology. "I'm so sorry. Wrong number. Please ignore." She expected that to be the end of it. No sane person would continue after receiving a wall of emotion from a stranger. But Daniel wasn't most people. Instead of ghosting her, he responded with unexpected kindness. "No need to apologize. I've been there too. Sometimes the wrong message finds the right person." Rachel paused. Something in that reply made her smile, even laugh, a tiny crack in the shell of sadness that had surrounded her for weeks. Out of curiosity, she asked, "You've sent the wrong message before?" And just like that, a door creaked open. What followed wasn't flirty or forced. It was two strangers stumbling into a conversation that neither of them saw coming. Rachel felt strangely safe. She didn't know this man. She didn't even know his last name. But for some reason, it felt easier to be honest with a stranger than with anyone else she knew. There was no pressure to perform, no need to protect her image. Just raw, unfiltered conversation. The universe, or maybe the algorithms, had done something bizarre. Her accidental message had landed in the inbox of someone kind, someone patient, someone who replied not with sarcasm or disinterest, but with empathy. It was a beginning wrapped in a mistake. A digital misstep that started a ripple. She had no idea that in trying to say goodbye to her past, she had unknowingly said hello to her future. And so, what began as an error became a spark, one that would soon change everything she thought she knew about love, timing, and the strangers we accidentally meet. Rachel didn't expect to hear from the stranger again. After their brief exchange, she thought the moment would pass like a strange glitch in the universe, a weird little footnote in her week of emotional chaos. But that night, as she was scrolling absent-mindedly through her gallery, her phone buzzed again. "I hope I'm not overstepping, but your message, it really stuck with me." Her thumb hovered over the screen. It was him again. The wrong number guy, Daniel. He had introduced himself briefly in the previous message. Something about his tone made her pause. He wasn't being pushy. He wasn't fishing for attention. He was curious. And in a way gentle. She thought for a few seconds before replying, "I guess I needed someone to read it. Just not you." A smile crept onto her face before she could stop it. What was she doing? She didn't even know what he looked like. She didn't even know if he was 40 or 20. He answered, "If it makes you feel better, I'm 30, single, and not a weirdo, I promise. Just someone who knows what heartbreak feels like." Rachel chuckled. The bold honesty made him seem more real. Her guard, still wounded from Nathan's betrayal, twitched but didn't rise. Maybe it was the timing. Maybe it was the fact that Daniel lived in another state. Or maybe, just maybe, she was tired of pretending to be okay in front of the people who actually knew her. Their conversation slowly drifted from the painful topic of love lost to something lighter. Favorite books? Childhood hobbies? Their mutual hatred for pineapple on pizza. Daniel shared that he was a software engineer in Chicago, loved indie movies, and had a dog named Marvin who snored louder than a freight train. Rachel told him about her job in advertising, her obsession with old vinyl records, and her dream of starting a podcast one day. It wasn't flirty, not yet. It was intriguing. There was something refreshing about talking to someone who had no preconceived image of her. He didn't know her past, her mistakes, or the social circles she tiptoed around in New York. And she didn't know his baggage either, just bits and pieces he shared voluntarily. It made the connection feel pure, like a clean slate. After a few nights of late texts, their messages started growing longer. Paragraphs turned into stories. One day, Daniel sent a photo of his dog sleeping upside down with a caption, "Marvin says goodnight." Rachel laughed out loud, the first real laugh she had in weeks. Then came the moment that shifted everything. "I like talking to you," he wrote. "It's strange, but it feels like I've known you longer than I actually have." Rachel stared at that message for a long time. Was it possible that a mistake could turn into something meaningful? Was this just the novelty of speaking to someone new, or was something deeper happening? She didn't know yet, but she replied anyway, "I like talking to you too." Maybe the wrong message found the right person. What started as accidental grew into a quiet routine. At first, Rachel didn't even notice it happening, how the hours between 10 p.m. and midnight became their window. It wasn't planned. There were no expectations, no pressure to check in. But somehow, as the city outside her apartment fell asleep, Daniel's messages always arrived like clockwork. And every night, she found herself smiling at her screen, waiting for the tiny notification, "Daniel is typing." Their conversations deepened. It was no longer just light banter or funny dog pictures. They began exploring corners of their lives that most people rarely reveal. Daniel told her about his father's passing when he was 16, how it shaped his understanding of responsibility and love. Rachel, in turn, shared how growing up with divorced parents taught her to look for emotional stability in others even when it meant losing herself in the process. The vulnerability didn't scare them. In fact, it drew them closer. The distance, over 700 miles between New York and Chicago, seemed to help. There were no physical distractions, no expectations of what came next. Just two voices over the phone, navigating through stories, laughter, and long pauses that didn't feel awkward. Their first voice call happened a week after the accidental message. It was spontaneous. Daniel texted, "Typing is too slow for this story. Can I call?" Rachel hesitated, heart thudding like a warning. But she said yes. When she heard his voice for the first time, calm and slightly raspy, she felt something shift inside her. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was comfort. It was warmth. And for someone who'd been bruised by emotional silence in her past relationship, Daniel's voice felt like a healing echo. Soon, their late-night chats turned into hours-long phone calls. Sometimes they played 20 questions. Sometimes they just stayed quiet, listening to each other breathe, as if they didn't want to hang up because the silence felt like companionship. Daniel would often say, "It's strange, isn't it? How I know the sound of your laugh better than your face." Rachel would smile and reply, "Maybe that's why it feels real." No distractions. Just truth. There was still a line they hadn't crossed. No exchange of photos yet. No "what are we" questions. They were floating somewhere between friendship and something dangerously close to more. But neither of them rushed it. Because in this rare digital space they had carved out, they found something sacred, presence. Rachel started sleeping better. Her coworkers noticed she was humming again at her desk. Even Marvin, Daniel's dog, became a running joke between them. "I think your dog is our third wheel," she once teased. Daniel laughed, "If he approves of you, you're already halfway to my heart." She didn't know where this was headed. Neither of them did. But each night, as the world shut down and only the glow of their phones lit their faces, Rachel knew one thing for sure. This stranger, this mistake, was slowly becoming her favorite part of the day. By the third week of talking, the masks were off. Daniel and Rachel had grown so comfortable with each other that conversations weren't just about getting to know each other anymore, they were about revealing the parts of themselves that most people never saw. It was no longer just, "What's your favorite movie?" or "What did you have for dinner?" It had become, "Why do you think you stayed with someone who didn't love you back?" And, "Do you believe we ever really heal from heartbreak?" It was during one of those deep, late-night calls that Daniel finally said something that lingered in Rachel's chest for days. "I was engaged 2 years ago," he confessed, his voice quieter than usual. "Her name was Elise. We were together for 5 years. She left the day after I lost my job. No goodbye, no closure, just a note on the counter." Rachel didn't speak at first. She didn't know what to say, but she didn't hang up either. Her silence was her presence, and Daniel could feel it. "I stopped believing in love for a long time," he continued. "I thought maybe some people just weren't meant to have it. Like maybe I wasn't built for long-term things. Until your message." Rachel felt her throat tighten. She took a deep breath before sharing her own truth. "Nathan made me feel like I was always asking for too much, like needing reassurance, love, effort was a flaw. I stayed for years thinking maybe if I could just be quieter, simpler, easier to love, he'd finally give me the version of him I was waiting for. But he never did. There was a pause. And then Daniel said something she would never forget. The right person will never make you feel like your needs are a burden. Rachel's eyes welled up. Not because it was poetic, but because it was true, and no one had ever said it to her so plainly. They began talking about fears. Rachel admitted she was terrified of vulnerability, of being hurt again, of falling for someone and losing herself in the process. Daniel admitted he sometimes felt like damaged goods, like any woman who got close enough would see the cracks Elise left behind. But those confessions didn't push them apart. They pulled them closer. Each broken piece they revealed made the other feel less alone. They didn't try to fix each other. They simply held space for the pain. And in that quiet acceptance, they started to heal. Rachel once said, "It's strange how I feel safer with you, someone I've never even met in person, than I ever did with someone I lived with for 2 years." Daniel replied, "That's because real connection doesn't need proximity. It just needs honesty." They still hadn't talked about meeting in real life. It was unspoken, a future possibility left hanging in the air. But even without physical presence, their connection had become something solid, something real. Two wounded hearts learning how to breathe again. Together. It started with a single sentence that shifted the air between them. One night, as their conversation drifted from deep memories to silly hypothetical questions like, if you were a fruit, what would you be? Daniel grew quiet. There was a pause. Not the kind that comes when someone is distracted, but the kind that carries weight. And then he said it, "I think I look forward to your messages more than I should." Rachel froze. Her stomach tightened, not in fear, but in something closer to realization. She had been feeling the same, though she hadn't dared say it out loud. There was a difference between casual comfort and emotional attachment. And over the last few weeks, Daniel had crossed that invisible line in her heart. He was no longer just the stranger who received her wrong message. He was the first person in a long time who made her feel seen. "I don't think there's a should here," she replied carefully. "Feelings don't really ask for permission, do they?" There was a long silence on the line, the kind that felt like a breath being held. And then softly Daniel said, "I think about you even when we're not talking. And it's not just because you're easy to talk to. It's more." Rachel's chest swelled with a mix of emotion, excitement, fear, and something dangerously close to hope. She had spent so long guarding herself that she forgot what it felt like to be genuinely wanted, not for convenience, not for appearance, but for her thoughts, her voice, her heart. Over the next few days, things began to shift subtly. They didn't label anything, didn't rush into declarations. But the messages became sweeter, more personal. Good morning texts. Late-night voice notes. A funny meme followed by, "This reminded me of you." They finally exchanged photos, not because they needed to, but because it felt right. Rachel sent a candid shot of her laughing with a coffee mug in hand, no makeup, hair messy. Daniel responded with a photo of him sitting on the floor next to Marvin, grinning with tired eyes. Neither was filtered. Both were real. And with those images, the connection deepened. Now, when she heard his voice, she could picture his face. When he laughed, she imagined the way his eyes crinkled. It was no longer just emotional, it was visual, human, intimate. One night, Rachel stared at the ceiling in her dark apartment and whispered to herself, "What is happening to me?" Because she knew. She was catching feelings. And she wasn't sure if she should be scared or excited. She picked up her phone and texted, "I never expected this. Any of this." Daniel replied almost instantly, "Neither did I. But I'm glad your message found me." For the first time in years, Rachel didn't feel lost. She felt found. There comes a moment in every unexpected connection when fantasy collides with reality, when hearts that have only known each other through screens begin to wonder what it would be like to exist in the same room, to breathe the same air, to reach out and confirm with touch what words alone have built. For Rachel and Daniel, that moment arrived quietly, on a rainy Thursday night, 3.5 weeks after the wrong message that changed everything. They had been dancing around the topic for days. Rachel would say things like, "If we were in the same city right now, I'd make you try my terrible lasagna." Daniel would respond with, "If you were here, we'd be walking Marvin through the park while arguing about 90s music." Their what-ifs were slowly turning into whens. Then, without overthinking it, Rachel said it out loud on a call, "Do you ever wonder if this would feel the same in person?" Daniel didn't hesitate. Every day. The silence that followed was not awkward, it was heavy with anticipation. Both knew the conversation was changing course. The idea of meeting wasn't just a hypothetical anymore. It was real. And terrifying. Because if this turned out to be everything they hoped, or if it didn't, everything would change. Rachel had never flown to meet someone she'd never touched. But this wasn't just someone. This was Daniel, the voice she woke up to, the laughter that now lived in her head, the man who had read her heart before ever seeing her face. "Do you think I'm crazy if I say I want to meet you?" she asked softly. Daniel replied, "Only if I'm crazy too." They spent the next few days talking logistics. Daniel offered to come to New York first, but Rachel insisted she needed a break from the city. So it was decided she would fly to Chicago for the weekend. No promises, no pressure. Just time. Just presence. The night before her flight, she barely slept. Her nerves were electric. What if they didn't click in person? What if the magic they shared in text and phone calls didn't survive the physical world? But underneath the anxiety was something stronger: hope. The kind of hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. At the airport, her hands trembled as she gripped her phone. Daniel messaged, "Gate 12. I'll be the guy pretending not to be nervous but absolutely panicking." She smiled. As she walked out of the terminal and into the waiting area, their eyes met. It took a second. He looked just like the photo, but seeing him move, breathe, exist, it was surreal. He gave a small wave. She laughed nervously. And then, without thinking, she walked right into his arms. No words. Just warmth. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't cinematic. But it was real. And sometimes real is more powerful than perfect. For the first few hours, everything felt like a dream. Daniel and Rachel walked the streets of downtown Chicago, talking like they always did, only this time their hands brushed against each other, their laughter echoed in the open air, and their smiles were no longer just imagined. The comfort was there. The chemistry undeniable. It felt like picking up a conversation that had started weeks ago, only now their words had shadows and weight and heat. But as the weekend wore on, something else crept in: reality. They were from different cities, different lives. The magic of their digital bond had pulled them together, but logistics, the ordinary, inconvenient truths of life, began to cast doubt over their fairy tale beginning. Rachel had her job, her rent, her routines in New York. Daniel had Marvin, a close-knit friend circle, and a stable position in Chicago he couldn't just walk away from. Long distance wasn't romantic in real life, it was hard. One afternoon, as they sat across from each other in a quiet cafe, Rachel stirred her tea and asked, "What happens after this?" Daniel didn't answer right away. His eyes searched hers like he was trying to measure his next words against both honesty and fear. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I don't want this to end just because of Miles." Rachel nodded. She felt the same. But saying "I want to keep trying" was easy. Doing it, navigating time zones, missed calls, schedules, was another story. That night, she cried quietly in the guest room of his apartment while Daniel walked Marvin. She wasn't crying because she was sad; they had shared something real. She was crying because for once something good had entered her life and she was terrified of losing it. Every time something started to go right, life always seemed to take it away. She wasn't sure if she could handle another heartbreak. But Daniel was not like Nathan. When he returned and saw the tears, he didn't panic. He sat beside her, took her hand, and said, "We don't have to figure everything out tonight. Let's just promise each other one thing: we don't disappear, no matter how hard it gets." And in that moment, Rachel realized something important. It wasn't the distance that scared her, it was the vulnerability. The idea of needing someone again. Of being seen. Of hoping. But Daniel didn't demand her hope. He earned it. When she flew back to New York the next day, it wasn't a goodbye, it was a beginning. They texted that night like nothing had changed. But everything had. The screen no longer held mystery, it held memory. They weren't just a digital connection anymore. They were a real story, built through screens, strengthened by distance, and made even more beautiful because of their decision to stay. A year later, Rachel stood in front of her mirror, adjusting a pair of small gold earrings. Her apartment was bathed in the warm glow of late afternoon sunlight. On her kitchen counter sat a bottle of wine, 2 glasses, and a lasagna baking in the oven, one she still jokingly referred to as barely edible. She was nervous, but not for the same reasons as before. Tonight wasn't about a first impression or unspoken fears. Tonight marked something much deeper. It was the anniversary of the message she had never meant to send. The doorbell rang. Rachel opened it to find Daniel standing there, holding a bouquet of mismatched flowers, sunflowers, wild daisies, a single rose in the middle, just like the ones she had said were her favorite in one of their early late-night calls. He stepped inside, placed a soft kiss on her forehead, and whispered, "I can't believe it's been a year." Neither could she. What had begun as a digital accident had unfolded into one of the most meaningful chapters of her life. Their long-distance relationship wasn't easy. There were dropped calls, missed flights, moments of doubt, and days that felt too quiet. But through it all, they stayed. They chose each other again and again. And somewhere along the way, the what-ifs had turned into when and then into soon. Daniel had recently accepted a remote role that gave him flexibility. Rachel had started looking at apartments in Chicago. They weren't rushing, but they weren't afraid anymore either. They knew the story they were writing didn't need to follow anyone else's timeline. After dinner, they sat on the couch, glasses in hand, Marvin asleep at their feet. Rachel scrolled through old messages on her phone, landing on the very first one she had mistakenly sent. She read it out loud, laughing at the sheer drama of it all. "I don't know why I'm writing this, but I need to say it," her voice trailed off, smiling. Daniel took the phone, looked at the message, then looked at her. "Best mistake of my life." Rachel leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. Same. She had once believed that love required perfect timing, carefully crafted plans, and years of building trust. But this love, her real love, came through chaos. Through a digital hiccup, a stranger's empathy, and the quiet courage to keep replying one message at a time. It wasn't just about romance. It was about connection, about the willingness to be open, and the magic that can happen when two people choose to see beyond coincidence. As the evening settled around them, Rachel smiled, knowing that the version of herself who sent that wrong message had no idea it would lead here. To warmth. To healing. To love. To the right person found entirely by mistake.